Welcome back to episode 171 of the Block Runner Podcast. I'm your host, William, always here with your co-host, Iman.
What's up, dude?
And on the sticks, we got TJ.
Hello.
And we're going to be doing something different today. We are in the Metaverse, and joining us today, we got Jin, we got Morph, and we got, who else we got? Roustan.
Yeah, how do you pronounce your name, Roustan? Before we called you Roustan, but apparently
you
that's
nailed it. You nailed it.
Roustan.
Yeah,
Perfect.
Perfect.
I mean, it's actually like Roustan. Like there's like a French twang
Roustan.
to it, but I say it wrong.
Okay,
I
cool.
just say Roustan.
Yeah, there's a few of us joining. We got Sea Searcher Dahlia, part of the team. She's here with us.
TJ, the producer.
TJ, of course. I'm kind of showing the different cameras. And if you're listening to this podcast, definitely check out our YouTube video. We are visually in the 3D space. You're going to want to check this out.
Yeah, this is as on brand as it gets for us, pretty much. Like we've been wanting to do something like this for a long time. So thank you guys for, I guess, setting up the right foundations for all this to even happen. Like this is really cool.
Yeah, so that's a good segue to kind of talk about like why we're here, how we got together, and why this conversation is extremely important for the Bitmap ecosystem. On screen, we're even showing the, what is it, Bitfeed Live?
Mm-hmm. By the way, this is all happening in Hyperfy. So
correct.
If you didn't
Shout out Ash.
Correct.
All right, so Roustan reached out to me. He was like, "Hey guys, I see this Bitmap thing you got going on.
Mm-hmm.
You need to talk to Jin and Morph and talk about like Bitmap and why they need to see what it is and why you need to like hook up with these guys." And so we got into the chat. We've known Jin for a little while. I mean, we got into Decentraland in 2019. Jin was part of that ecosystem early on as well. And so finally we get to the talk, and more importantly, the experiences that everybody on this call and in the virtual world right now are going to be important to actually building out the Bitmap ecosystem. So thank you guys for joining us, and yeah, let's kind of talk shop and really talk about like how what Bitmap is and why it got so important.
Yeah, I guess first can we let's get a background, I guess, on everybody who's gonna talk here today. I mean, our audience knows us pretty well. Like, how did you guys get involved in the metaverse space? Was it pre-Web3, pre-Mark Zuckerberg pivot announcement, post, whatever? Like, what is it that keeps you guys motivated, right? Because we're here in the depths of like the deepest despair points of the bear market, right? And we're all still here. We're all still building. So, like, what is it that's motivating you guys to continue on?
If it's all right, I think it's cool if I go first because that'll help segue into the other guys. Mm-hmm. Basically, in March 2021, I bought into the People NFT craze, started selling NFTs. Within a month or two, I was invited to show my work in Decentraland in a gallery. Long story short, it blew my mind. I immediately saw the potential versus what I'd been experiencing for over a decade in the real life gallery scene. And so I ended up for months selling dozens of NFTs and made enough money to buy my own parcel in Decentraland. And on October 29th, 2021, I opened my gallery in Decentraland, which was the day that Meta was announced. And 1,800 people showed up to the gallery in Decentraland that week, which topped my best solo show in real life, which was like 500 people RSVPing to my show. And so I never thought I could top that real life show. And in a day, I did that in Decentraland. So I was hooked. I was completely hooked, dove in deep, spent months, have a huge place in my heart with Decentraland. Like you guys, I understand. And but I didn't limit myself to that. I continued to explore every other platform out there because nobody knows the future of the metaverse or how it's going to end up, if there's going to be a preferred platform, if there's going to be interoperable multiple platforms. So I made sure to be aware of everything. And earlier this year, Morph was vocal about Hyperfy, and that was one that I hadn't explored yet. And so I jumped into that, saw them do a VR interview similar to this one, and it blew my mind. Same way that the gallery first blew my mind in Decentraland, and then I dove in on Hyperfy, and Hyperfy, in my opinion, is the best platform currently today. It enables users to build and create without even using coding. It's just mind-blowingly good, smooth, and easy to use. And then I learned about bitmaps, and I became a member of the M3 Metaverse Makers, which Jin is like co-founder of, I believe, and Morph is a big part of it. Morph is the one who invited me to apply to become a member of M3 Metaverse Makers, and so I sit in their little Discord like a little wallflower, just completely blown away by the like what's being shown and shared. It's like, to me it feels like the Illuminati of the metaverse create it's just like
Yeah.
powerful masterminds preparing for the future and building things that nobody has really seen yet, and people think they've seen stuff but they haven't seen it the way that Jin has been presenting it, and I got to learn about Jin's history and was just completely blown away. And so when I started to uncover Bitmap through your podcast, and obviously I was paying attention. I'd actually been following your YouTube before you started doing bitmaps, and I just immediately learned about it as soon as you started posting about it. I saw the potential in that tremendously. Obviously, nobody knows who's right, who's wrong, but it just felt like I had to connect all these great minds together, you guys, Jen and Morph, so that for in my selfish way is just to better understand the total potential.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and by the
That's
way,
my-
Roustan is a very successful artist. Definitely, we'll put all the links in the description, but he's got a very successful YouTube channel as well. So I really appreciate that, Roustan, for putting us together and talking shop, because building out the metaverse is a complex thing, and it's going to take a collaborative effort to do so.
Correct. At a mass scale. So
Yeah.
I guess this is a good, like, I mean, there's been attempts at this before to try and, I guess, galvanize collaborative interest. Everybody's in the same boat.
Yeah.
So we definitely all need to contribute to that. But hopefully this conversation, like, it serves, if anything, at the end of all this, it serves as like an example of like what needs to be done. Everybody has their own like specialties, right? And if you're a dev, even if you're a non-dev, everybody has something to contribute, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's awareness or education or building culture, building any kind of value, right? Obviously, it always starts with the developers because,
For sure.
that's the foundational level, but all of us are involved one way or another. So, yeah, if you're really interested in this metaverse stuff after this conversation, definitely, I guess, seek us out, because we literally live and breathe this stuff.
Yeah, 100%.
And we have been for many years now, so we're not going anywhere. So we want this group to hopefully one day turn into hundreds of people and hundreds of devs, everybody working towards the same goals,
Morph, you want to give us your background?
Yeah, sure. Cool. Yeah. So, I mean, I kind of joined a pretty similar time to Roustan with Decentraland. And, really for me, it was just a question of like, I've always really valued like developer environments that let people produce content. So, Gary's Mod kind of comes to mind there, and Roblox and Second Life and all these things. But I always found them like really subpar because they didn't kind of have that underlying like either governance or like monetary system, and so it was really difficult to use online, right? Like I remember I sold a RuneScape party hat one time for like a decent amount of money, and I had to get the guy to like wire transfer to my real name through like some sketchy bank system, and yeah, it was just awful. And then when I came to Decentraland, I saw them like solving all those problems and like actually building connected systems that kind of did that for the users, and it really made me want to jump in. And then I learned about avatar interop, and I was like, okay, I got to get on board with this. I got to get my own avatar, something unique, and I got to rig it, get the Vicini, so I can kind of come in the metaverse and actually like experience it properly. And that was how I met Jen in M3, and ever since then, I mean, it's just been a wild ride of like seeing what is possible, and then trying to leverage other people's work, right? Like I wouldn't consider myself like an on the ground foundational builder. I'm not out there building a lot of this like metaverse libraries or anything, but I consider myself like a user, like a first effect user, where like I'll leverage all those systems and bring them together to kind of like create my own content, and I hope that adds like value in its own way as well. So yeah, I'm just really excited to be here because I mean I love Bitcoin and I love the metaverse. Like they're both really important to me for different reasons, and so I'm kind of keen to like learn how those two overlap and where that overlap is, and also like how for me, like I see Bitcoin as like the most expensive / valuable block space. So I think it's gonna be a really interesting conversation about like, is this the most valuable land? But then on the other hand, like Ethereum has a lot going for it with like smart contracts and stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe this is the use case that finally brings smart contracts to Bitcoin. I don't know. I'm just getting involved here now, but yeah, I'm so excited to learn. So thanks for having me, guys.
No, I appreciate it more. If I think you're right. I think there's a pretty good chance that we have smart contracts brewing on top of Bitcoin. It's going to be a little
a little different from like a
different, yeah.
mechanistic approach, but as far as like the end game utility of whatever it is that ends up becoming that standard of like functionality enablement on Bitcoin, I don't think it's going to be like a solidity type of like a virtual machine, maybe something different.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, like the whole goal is to bring about as much robust functionality because the value of Bitcoin is tremendous, right? So like
Yeah.
the effort or the mission of that is it's worthy of an endeavor,
Yeah,
right?
100%.
And there are people working on that. And same thing with the metaverse prospect, right? The metaverse, especially one that is not anchored to like a centralized organization, it's worthy of an attempt.
Yeah.
Right. Which is why we're seeing it proliferate on the Ethereum side of, and other chains like that as well. But what more valuable proposition than to bring that to, I guess, like the most OG of blockchain ecosystems, the most secure, the most highly distributed one, and the most valuable, right? So that is, I guess, what you're seeing as far as like opportunity and like interesting verticals. That's what got our attention too.
Yeah.
And like, before we were just natively interested in ordinals because like, dude, people are building stuff on Bitcoin, right? That's cool.
Yeah.
But then out of nowhere, we found this first
100%.
attempt at standardizing like an infrastructure layer for the metaverse on
Yeah.
Bitcoin. We didn't even see that on Ethereum.
Right.
Right. So that is like, this is too interesting, right?
Yeah.
We can't look away at this point.
It was a no-brainer.
Yeah. So yeah, we definitely want to talk to you guys more about this, see if you agree.
All right, Jin, your background?
Yeah, I've been in the crypto and VR space since early 2010s. Got into crypto through mining and building my own mining machine. And before all of that, I was interested in peer-to-peer and decentralized technologies, working on wireless mesh nets, and got into virtual worlds as well as just growing up in RuneScape and playing MMOs. So I quickly grasped some of the concepts that was happening and the value in terms of this new infrastructure. And I really want this stuff to work from a sense of, the stuff that we're building in one platform, that it can be useful in others. And I've been kind of obsessed about how we can connect these virtual worlds together into an intranet of its own. Because I think the metaverse is about the connective tissue, the in-between technology, kind of like how the internet used all these protocols to have computers talk to each other and all these different devices. So pretty involved in standards groups and open research and finding ways to connect these worlds. And in the crypto scene, I think that there's a lot of interesting incentive structures with how crypto artists are sort of making things that they display in these various worlds, platforms, but then a lot of it's all built on open file formats, and it's evolving from 2D art into more 3D game dev art and wearables and avatars. And I do a lot of stuff regards to avatar interoperability, wearable interop. Those things are, the most portable is literally on legs, walking in between. So thinking about how to kind of, just connect makers together between all these worlds so that we can create more trading posts and more ways that we can align into something greater sum of its parts. But pretty, all over the map, because metaverse stuff is just involving all kinds of technology. But really bullish on open tech stacks, like WebXR and things that you can own everything from, even self-hosting it on your own hardware. When I got into Bitcoin, we had the whole chain on our wallets. And I feel that nowadays so much of that is abstracted away, and even down to like the hardware itself. It was like we had this machine that was powering a decentralized network, in our homes, in our, powering us, heating our rooms during the winters. But it was like a constant reminder, you're part of this decentralized network movement, and seeing other people's mining rigs and whatnot, that was pretty inspiring. But now, yeah, it doesn't feel that tangible. So I do some stuff involved with digital physical wearables as well for avatars. So
Okay.
maybe that could be a way to onboard in. But yeah, and M3 was mentioned. It's kind of like a homebrew metaverse club. And it's all sorts of devs across VR, AR, open source, AI, chatting every day, kind of like a hackerspace.
Did you know that we're more than just a YouTube channel? We also built Mscribe, the first inscription platform built from the ground up for the metaverse on Bitcoin. Connect your Bitmap ordinals and use our tools to bring your community into the virtual realm. Support us by joining the movement at mscribe.io. Like, comment, and subscribe for the latest alpha. Back to the video. So who started M3?
Started back in 2019 between me, Avier, and Chris, who we were just chatting. A lot of web experts, devs kind of find each other because we're all building on the same substrate. And so it just kind of like aligns more between people building 3D web tech than, say, native VR developers, because they're usually going through like an app store, and there's no like incentive for them to want to collaborate so much with each other. There's no, way you can hop from their app to another one's, and that's like leaking users anyways, in their world. But yeah, we just met up, and then we just started to host events like lightning talks, and the whole vibe's been like teach, learn, build for a while. But we have all of our research kind of posted on GitHub, and we still continue to build out stuff there. I just had a demo day last weekend where 5 people gave some really interesting talks.
Okay. So I think for I guess I don't want to like, kind of constrict this conversation, but I think the main focus should be around like Bitmap and kind of like the most efficient way to build out this ecosystem, because I think Bitmap provides us an opportunity here where, like Iman was saying earlier, Bitmap was like the first or one of the earlier standards that start at the ground level, in the sense that it gives everybody a framework to build out their virtual world.
Yeah, and I think ultimately it's that alignment mechanism of that is what Bitmap is, right? Where now we have this open canvas framework where there is nothing, there is no technical infrastructure in place, but there is something underpinning all of the technical layer that can be developed that aligns the entire ecosystem to create a cohesive network effect, right? That ultimately those are the same types of primitives that exist on the internet, right? On the Web 2 infrastructure, and that is kind of like what became the inflection point to the internet's development.
Yeah,
it is aligning developers across the planet to contribute to a communication network. So we see that Bitmap as the same potential inflection point for this metaverse space, because up in our own personal experience, all we've seen is like a fragmentation of effort.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
It's kind of like early internet. Everybody was building their own intranets, and there's a lot of fragmentation. There wasn't a lot of sharing of idea, collaboration, right? So to us, Bitmap is that opportunity.
Yeah.
I'm boring the hell out of TJ.
Yeah. No, sorry.
But yeah, so we wanted to start, I guess, with that. Bitmap is just like a nice name.
Yeah.
I guess to that concept of it in itself, right?
Yeah. So Jen, I want to get your take on like what you understand from Bitmap. Do you see what Iman's talking about, or are we just like out of the loop on terms of like the standards for the metaverse and stuff like that?
It's a canvas, that's for sure, but it feels like it's pretty early infrastructure. I think crypto has just in general a lot of potential to kind of marry between the UI UX layer with spatial computing. So anything that can kind of align people to build on interoperable open standards and payment rails will ultimately kind of help to realize this vision of, the next version of the internet.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a pretty, interstitial field with all sorts of disciplines and whatnot. So, that's the data layer, but you have a whole bunch of other layers that
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
are involved in the construction, like tech stacks. I think y'all wanted to chat about different virtual world stacks that people could deploy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's set the stage. So right now there's a little bit over 800,000 bitmaps, and every day there's 144 bitmaps that are generated, and there's now bots purchasing those bitmaps, right? So in order to beat that bot, you have to outbid that bot. So 144 new bitmaps, and there's essentially what's called a blockout every single day. So but with that, there's roughly 22,000 holders on holding these bitmap assets on top of Bitcoin. And the largest Web3 metaverse right now is Sandboxed with 23,000. So it's neck and neck.
It's on its way.
It's on its way, right?
Yeah.
So having said that, each bitmap holds roughly 2,000 parcels or 2,000 transactions. And if you do the math, I think someone did the analytics, and there's roughly 850 million parcels in the Bitmap ecosystem. So comparing that to something that's well known like Decentraland, there's roughly, I think, a little bit less than 100,000 parcels.
Right.
I mean, we're talking about a significantly sized ecosystem of metaverse projects, if you will.
Yeah, and that in itself is like, that is what is encompassing in, I guess, the original proposition of bitmap theory, right? It is, and then from us, we kind of extrapolated on the idea of bitmap and ordinals itself and created like an attempt at creating like an understanding of like what is actually happening here. Like, why is this valuable? These non-arbitrary mechanisms of spinning up like a metaverse infrastructure, at least at the architecture level, from like a spatial point of view. Like, where is the spatial allocation within this metaverse ecosystem, right? It's not being just spun up out of thin air, right? The other side is being probably viewed as one of the biggest attempts at creating a virtual environment because of all the money that's being poured into it, the brand power behind Yuga Labs and all this. But what's actually factoring into the determination of what is going to be proliferated in their virtual environment? It comes from Yuga Labs itself, right? There is no sense or meaning behind it. It's just spun out of thin air.
It's arbitrary.
Right. So bitmaps is the first attempt at, I guess, creating like a non-arbitrary process that we like to refer to as digital matter theory, I guess, which is the process of applying, I guess, blockchain data and sourcing that information to something of new digital value creation, right? It's a mechanism in itself to where now there's like a non-human component, right?
That's right.
To generating new digital value.
It essentially removes the human factor in decision making.
Right. So that's what bitmaps is. So it's already done in a sense, like, the Bitcoin block information of how many blocks exist and the transactions within them. That is the information within the blockchain that has been utilized. Right. And at this point, the introduction of new space, it's just an autonomous process at this point. It's like you said, 144 new potential environments are being generated every single day. Right. And nobody knows what the transaction outlook is every single day, right? It's completely dependent on the human activity on chain. Sorry?
Are there any environments or like what right now we kind of see this overview of all the bitmaps, I believe, and but how do you actually kind of inspect the content that's deployed on any of these blocks?
Yeah, see, that is basically why we're in this infrastructure period where like now there's this open opportunity for anybody to kind of like leverage this this value spatial creation mechanism and like apply new interpretations on top of that, right? So now who is going to build the real stack, I guess, that where anybody who owns or has access to the ownership of this virtual space can now deploy what it is that what you're talking about. Now we can go in and inspect the actual substance of this metaverse, right?
Yeah, and to
look like
well, so that's a good question. So there's a few people building on top of the Bitmap ecosystem. We have Foxy, which we're going to be doing an interview pretty soon.
Yeah.
And they're building this thing called Bitverse. There's another one called from IMSO Chris Bitmap Valley. And there's another one called Expector, which came from the XRP community, and I think they've they've had a lot of the assets that they have. They're just
Yeah.
they're pivoting and incorporating bitmaps into what they were already building.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's as much as what exists. And I'm sure there's others building out there that haven't been like brought to us, like at least, that we've seen. But but you're right. To a large extent, we need step 2, which is what is going to be the metaverse stack. And part of this conversation is figuring out whether or not a stack needs to be selected and then used across the board.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I'll tell you what I think is going to happen is, someone like Jin and Morph and Roustan, they'll leverage, like you guys may come up with your own metaverse stack and deploy it on top of Bitmap, and people will connect to your platform, and because they believe on the stack that you've selected, right? They believe that this is going to be the next Roblox or the next experience that people are going to leverage. And others will have different opinions, and they'll build their own stack, and they'll build out what they think is going to be successful. Mm-hmm. So that's how I see. So these are like different networks sort of forming within the Bitmap ecosystem. The analogy I like to use is the one where we have WordPress, we have Webflow. These are things that you can connect to and connect your domain to build out a website. So you'd be connecting your bitmap to an existing sort of like network, if you will, mm-hmm. and then build out your virtual world using that tech stack.
Yeah, I don't think it looks any different than what you're already familiar with, pretty much. There's nothing about native to bitmaps or Bitcoin or, the fact that this is happening on a different chain that's going to feed into like any kind of different. I mean, it could if somebody creates like a procedural engine to generate, terrain or anything like that based on.
Deploy these worlds, like Hyperfy we're in right now. Ash has been working on this for like maybe close to 8 years now. And I've been working on virtual world stack type stuff for now like a decade. Same with other people in M3, but it's like not a easy thing to just launch your own.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
it is pretty, like straightforward to build your own world. Like in Hyperfy, you can drag and drop and build a world. Mm-hmm. But not everyone wants to be a sysadmin to, manage the. It's kind of like a website, It's if you want to launch a website, a lot of people can launch websites, and I think Webflow is a good analogy. WordPress too. And I'm bringing up on a screen something made by a M3 member, 30V. It's literally a plugin for WordPress to deploy 3 websites on WordPress.
Dude, that's cool. Okay,
and you can have an AI-powered NPC and whatnot. So, it's not just maybe worlds. It could also be a, inscription for a character or personality or agent, in these worlds.
Yeah. That's interesting. So, so this is a virtual world happening through your WordPress site.
Yeah, it takes like 5 minutes to set up, and you could have your own. And WordPress is like deployed quite far and wide on the web, so there's already a lot of pre-existing infrastructure and.
Okay, so I have a question for you, Jin. So now that we understand like sort of what Bitmap is, and each Bitmap represents like a different set of transactions, which represent different potential sizes for the parcels. Mm-hmm. How do you envision leveraging, like, let's say you were running this WordPress metaverse site? How would you envision incorporating Bitmap into this? Or maybe it doesn't even make sense to do that. Maybe it makes sense to like start new, and how does your virtual world recognize that, hey, this bitmap has 2,000 transactions versus that bitmap has 3,500 transactions? How do you reconcile that?
I think, if the documentation on kind of like in terms of workflows and pipelines isn't straightforward yet, then we have a lot to kind of build in terms of groundwork first for just tooling. Like, can think about, the question kind of is about almost like user-facing things, but I just wonder what the developer-facing tools are like right now, because it's a bit of a chicken and egg thing going on.
So yeah, there are no tools, right? Essentially for Bitmap, like we're starting new. So the existing tools out there, they need to be adjusted to recognize the different parameters that each bitmap has. And so I guess one of the next
Are there
steps.
concentrated on building out those tools? Is it ad hoc, or is there a grant system for developers to,
Yeah,
like, how's the ecosystem look for that?
no, there's definitely no grant system. It is literally ad hoc in the sense that people have to first, and that's really the point of this, not necessarily this conversation, our entire podcast, right? Is essentially revolving around this idea of the metaverse,
Mm-hmm.
and the main point, or like it feels like our main existence between Iman and I, and like the existence of this podcast, is to identify the actual problems in the metaverse so that we can shed light on those problems and have people understand those problems and then attack those problems. Because for the most part, all this fragmentation we've seen, they're attacking different problems, right?
Yeah.
Problems that we personally see ourselves that are much more grand than the solutions that are put forth out there.
Yeah, one of the biggest ones is for sure figuring out development sustainability. That was one of the core first dilemmas we came across in Decentraland in our experience. It's like, yeah, why is there's this great open world environment?
Mm-hmm.
It's decentralized. There's an SDK framework to build. So how come every time we log in, it just stays green? Like there's nothing being built. Why are devs not interested in this, right? And there is a DAO, and there are grants available. Right. There's millions of dollars at hand to distribute. As long as the mechanism of the governance is like, sound, sure enough to ensure it's going into the right hands, right? So why isn't it working? Yeah. Right. So we've been thinking, we think about this constantly, and then, the answer is definitely an elusive one, right? How come, Facebook and Meta are having such difficulty doing something with infinite resources, right? So I don't know. To us, like, I guess the idea of creating like as large of a decentralized metaverse ecosystem is probably like a best attempt, I guess, at creating like organic contribution. Cause I think like funneling funds into, I guess, the right curated hands hasn't always, worked out, I guess. So it's almost like creating sorry, go ahead.
Especially after the Meta announcement, like so much hype and capital flowed into the space.
Yeah.
And it kind of washed out or drowned out a lot of the the OGs, and savants that have been kind of in the trenches building.
Yeah.
And, I know a lot of the people that work on open source social VR stacks, and that's kind of like, what the people want. Social is like a killer future for VR spatial computing. And whenever Zuck posts something about Horizon, he's just being ratioed by people who have been using VR chat and these other platforms that have legs in them, which kind of says something about what people kind of perceive, and it's like really important self-expression. There's like different degrees of freedom that I want to bring together between the VR people with, this new canvas for expressing your art and creativity with avatars and worlds, and the freedom of, being able to transact without middlemen through what a lot of the people in the crypto movement believe. And I think, to build a metaverse that's worth living in, we need to bring these two sides together.
Yeah,
but it has to be a stack and you can self-host, down to their own hardware, in my opinion.
Go ahead, Morph.
One thing that Decentraland's been doing that was kind of interesting is they're moving away from this idea of like the map, right? Like this overworld, and moving towards like namespaces.
Yeah,
true.
Which I think is like a really interesting idea because it's kind of like lowering the barrier to entry. And I think that's to your guys' point. Like you can't just give people a bunch of money and expect them to build something. You need to make it like really easy for them to build, and like they'll pick the place to build on that is like the best for them, right? Which is always like subjective. But most of the time that comes down to like what's going to make them have like the easiest time and like the most interoperability and like features they can add and things. Which is one reason I'm kind of nervous about the Bitcoin kind of metaverse space is it almost feels like it's too valuable, right? Like a Bitcoin block space is so expensive and sought after And then when we kind of look at it from like an overview, it's very similar to like ENS, I guess, where you have like a set kind of like name. I guess we'll call it like a block number as your name, and then you have like subdivisions into subnames, and you can use those. And at the end of the day, it's really just a definition of like who owns what, and gives you the right, on some system to deploy.
Correct.
And so I think it's really cool that like Bitcoin's exploring this, because it is going to push that stuff forward. But unless you have that kind of grant system, I think it's going to be really hard to find just like open source dev here, because it is going to be like a slightly higher barrier to entry, right?
1,000%. Yeah, and you definitely identified what we interpret as like the perfect value add that Bitmap, I guess, the identification system represents. Yeah, and we have we already see a way we could leverage that with MetaZone and Meta, content distribution layer itself, right? Like the app layer is what we like to call it. We took advantage and leveraged Decentraland natively as our beachhead to kind of like prove that concept out, that we can develop, functional high grade application within the metaverse space, as long as all the right, technical components exist and all the right, distribution channel pathways exist, and they do exist natively in Decentraland, right?
They do, yeah.
Not necessarily from Decentraland to anywhere else. Now that's a different problem, right? That's something else. So the fact that Bitmap does exist and the scale of it allows for, I guess, different interpretations as far as different tech stack deployment grounds, as long as that underpinning ID system still remains with, is integrated and remains, I guess, preserved.
Part of the foundation, yeah.
Right, of any tech stack that is applied on top of it, whether they're, different functions or whatever, right? Like MetaZone and Metas and our applications have a place to deploy, and they can all still communicate with one another, right? So that we see value in that, right? Because as opposed to waiting around for somebody to come up with like an abstraction concept to where, all these different fragmented silo metaverse ecosystems, in order for them to, I guess, interoperate and intercommunicate, we need that abstraction layer, right? To enable apps to, like, I guess, be cross deployable. So it's kind of like we see a framework to build that infrastructure from the get go, as opposed to kind of like dealing with the silo problem and then waiting for somebody to develop that on top of it, right? So,
I have an example right here, by the way.
Sorry?
There was something that I figured out like a couple weeks ago. I stumbled on this video about Horizon Worlds. It was a FUD video by
There's been a lot of those.
Jarvis Johnson. Right. Yeah. Jarvis Johnson. I spent a week alone in the metaverse. I watch all this stuff, positive or negative.
Yeah.
And this one was specific to Horizon Worlds. And I saw what he didn't see was with my experience in the metaverse. I never got to try Horizon Worlds because I don't have a VR headset, so I haven't been able to do it. But what I was watching on the screen as I was watching his video was what looked like an alternate dimension of Decentraland. There is an existing community in Horizon Worlds, and it's all in VR. So in a way, they're ahead of Decentraland because they already have VR established. Yeah, they have no legs, but that's the way it is with VR. It's hard to place legs when it comes to VR positioning, I guess, right? I don't know the technical details. But like, people get caught up so much in the media that they don't even bother to try these things out. And to my surprise, it looked pretty cool, And as Jin said, it takes time. And as Zuck has said, like, he doesn't expect to be anywhere near what he's envisioning by at least 2025, So it's I feel like it's important to always remember that, like, we don't know, like, we can't judge a metaverse yet by the way it looks, and I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm forgetting what my point was.
I got an example kind of built here because I think no matter what platform you're building on, that you at least have freedom to kind of take your content with you if things don't work out and whatnot. And I think a home space like is a really good selling point for such, because it's, do you own the keys to your own virtual home? And if you don't want to kind of stay, are you able to at least pack and move? And I've got, this pod that was ported from one platform on Cyber and brought into my own on a ENS domain, and that's completely self-hosted. And also brought it into a whole bunch of other places, Voxels, Metaverse, VR chats over here, and each of them kind of unlock their own kind of new community and features out of the box. So,
yeah, totally. Like my personal mission lately has been connecting to the PFP NFT communities that I'm a holder of, and letting them become aware of things like Hyperfy and VRMs and how to that they should be connecting with a company like Vipe to create their VRM avatar so their holders can bring their owned assets into these worlds. And I think that will unlock the metaverse for all the holders, at least, which will start to unlock it for people in the future.
So I'm starting to see a couple of things that we're inherently all recognizing here, as Jin is showing us on Cyber, is we're in Hyperfy, and on Cyber is similar in the sense that it's a room, right? It's one big room, and in that room you can put pretty much anything that you want. And then the opposite side of this coin is we have things like Decentraland, where you jump into the world and it's not really it's also a room, but it's also not just a room. It's spaces, like it's actual parcels that in an open environment that you can go and particularly own and deploy content within what you own. So when you guys think of the metaverse, are these just different experiences, or do you think, like with bitmaps, like they have two options, right? You can have a bitmap into like a room just like we're in right now, or a very similar type of experience where it's parcels that are connected to each other that individuals own, that they have the rights to deploy onto that world. And I feel like this is an important decision that we got to make here, in the sense that, you know, if we're going to spend resources building out this bitmap ecosystem, we got to pick one of these two paths, you know, because we can't, you know, ideally we would like to do both. But
when you say we, who are you referring to?
We in general, like we as a developers, all of us as developers, like if we're going to do something on bitmap, we got to start with, is it a room or is it a world, so to speak, where in that world people own parcels that they can deploy content onto those parcels, right? And so,
yeah. Oh, were you?
No, that was it. What do you think, Roustan?
Yeah, I've actually, like, since I was a kid, I always had this thought in my mind, like my reality. Right now, I live in California, and I'm just like, all right, I'm here in California. It's gorgeous out, gorgeous sunny, and right now in this moment, something's happening in Japan, and I can't see it. You know, it's not a part of my life. It's like this thing exists, but it doesn't really exist for me, right? And that's kind of the same deal with open metaverse versus pocketverse. And I really, once I started diving into Hyperfy, I didn't care so much about the metaverse, especially because the portals that you can add to your Hyperfy world instantly bring you to another pocketverse if you want. But it wasn't until driving came around and flying, and like in CryptoVoxels, you can fly right now all over CryptoVoxels, and it's like pretty fun. You can't totally do that in Hyperfy. So there is value to the open metaverse world, and I think as technology continues to expand and things start loading faster and optimization becomes less of an important thing, maybe like pocket verses will be obsolete. You know, I feel like open metaverse is the way that it should be.
Okay,
I love that term too, pocket verses.
Yeah,
I never heard of that one. But yeah, that's the great way to kind of like, I think for sure, yeah, in the beginning stages, it makes the most sense to kind of introduce, I guess, the idea of, I guess, virtual spatial exploration in like these pocket verse experiences. Like it's like a really easy, low hanging fruit, I guess, because of the nature of where we are, I guess, from a technology standpoint.
Yeah,
it's probably our best chance of getting like a, you know, interested demographic, right? Other than because, you know, you're competing against, you know, the traditional game space, right? Which they could spin up a magnificent virtual experience like at will, right? And that people can kind of interact with and get familiar with, and then I guess once they get introduced to the metaverse experience, like, all right, that's what they're gonna reference as their comparison, right? It's like, well, this is nothing like Skyrim. Like,
Yeah,
why
those
would I?
triple A's though, they cost tens, if
Of
not
course,
hundreds of millions of dollars though.
right, but from the demographic, the user
Sure.
perspective, they're not factoring.
Yeah,
that
they don't know
in.
that.
They don't care. They just care about like,
Yeah.
what am I doing with my spatial existence in the digital space? Like,
Yeah.
you know, what am I getting in return for that, right? So,
Yeah, a pocketverse is really valuable to brands because then you have no neighbors
yes,
ruining your loading, you know. And then, but what I've discovered with Decentraland and Decentraland Worlds versus Genesis City, for example, like I have like 5 worlds that I've built on. I have 2 parcels in Genesis City that I built on, so I have like the experience between both. And as we all know, I think the Decentraland community is probably the strongest community of any metaverse platform.
mm-hmm.
And like you don't generally use worlds that much. You go check it out.
Mm.
Maybe someone builds something.
Yeah.
You have a party there, and someone goes and checks it out, and then you never go back. You never go back to it really, unless you like consistently pump content out. But people, I'm noticing people would rather be in Genesis City, and that came up in a dialogue last night on Beyond the NFT with Sinful Meatstick, and Make an NFT was his guest interview, and he was talking about how he wants to own a parcel, and there is a build within Decentraland Genesis City called well, I forget what it's called, but it's a skyscraper, and you can buy your own condo. And he bought a condo, which was a low entry point fee, and he has neighbors that he can participate with, and it's his home. And he's like, yeah, I have worlds, but I want to be a part of this in world condo. You know, so there's something there, and I had the same feeling with my own worlds, with my 5 worlds, and they're cool, they're very cool, but it's like there's something weird about it not being in Genesis City. I can't put my finger on it, but it just does not feel the same.
Yeah, I tend to agree.
Yeah.
So let's go just one small half step deeper in the technicals as far as this goes, and here's what I mean. When you own a bitmap, you are a district owner, right? You own essentially 2,000 parcels, right? So let's say I sell out those parcels, right? I make, 100 grand, whatever it is, doesn't matter. But now there's essentially, let's assume there's 2,000 owners for the 2,000 parcels. So once that's there, like the district owner needs to decide, is like, okay, which type of world am I going to deploy for these parcel owners, right? Because somebody has to deploy it, right? So let's assume he makes the decision. And it's a Unity stack, right? With the SDK that comes out of the box, right? So that means that, it's up to the parcel owners to build out whatever they want within their own parcel. But what if, in this scenario, the guy who owns the district never deploys a virtual world to begin with, right? And now these parcel owners are left essentially kind of holding the bag, right? They can't really deploy anything. So I feel like we need to offer the 2 scenarios, right? The district owner actually deploys a virtual world. The parcel owners can start deploying content in said virtual world. And if the district owner doesn't actually deploy anything, the parcel owners can still connect to something to deploy a pocket verse, right? To at least not have like a wasted asset just like lingering out there. What do you guys think of that?
It's kind of similar to what we're seeing with Otherside in a way. If you think of Otherside as one bitmap, right? And we all have these deeds now. Well, some of us have it, right? I have one. I know you have one, Will, right? Or you have more than one. And I don't know what it means to have the deed personally entirely.
Nobody
for
does.
me,
Nobody does. Yeah.
I don't care so much about the gameplay or collecting vessels and stuff. I don't care so much about play to earn. I want my little deed so that I could build something on it. That's all I care about. Right now, I feel like I might not even be getting that, which is not exciting. So yeah, I mean, that's sort of relevant to your question.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think everyone anticipated that this would be like a large open world. I guess that was how it was pitched to a certain extent. I mean, we all
I don't know. They pitched also a lot of like play to earn promises at a time where play to earn was like at its peak.
That's true.
And then a lot of like outlining of different game components, codas and natural resources embedded within each deed and stuff like that. So it felt like the primitives of some sort of game landscape.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure in the early days of their architecture and design, there was a lot more like hands-on design elements.
Not only that, in the middle of that, then the SEC came knocking on the door.
Right. And then they kind of like stopped all like at least in that direction, right? Then we started to hear a lot more things about like MML. A lot more like open source tooling for people to kind of like build their own stuff, right? And which I think is probably the better approach.
Yeah.
Right. Is to go down that avenue of
it might be the only approach for like these large organizations. Like you can't build for other people, right? Because that's exactly what Howie did he basically sold oranges on behalf of parcel owners, right? Land owners.
Yeah.
And then divvied up the revenue to those landholders. Right? You can't do that, right? I mean, you can do that if you're undoxed, right? You're anonymous, but largely, you can't, right?
Well, you can't take people's money and then tell them, or I guess distribute then something and then build everything out for them. In other words, that is a dangerous prospect.
And really, that's what it looked like. The other side was doing until they updated, like you have to burn your land or something and do all kinds of weird stuff. Did you know that we're more than just a YouTube channel?
We also built MetaZone, the first app store for the metaverse.
Buy, sell, and explore a new class of digital assets like our flagship game, Rovi.ai.
Support us by collecting your digital assets through MetaZone at metazone.io.
Like, comment, and subscribe to stay updated.
Back to the video. Right, so it all goes back to full circle, open source tooling for developers, and then eventually that's going to lead to tooling for non-developers, right? This is really, that should be the focus.
How long and expensive, did it of a route that they took to finally get back to the point, where we've been building. I just see so much money going into kind of repeating a lot of the same mistakes and, lessons learned of builders on the we've been kind of like working on, open source tooling and this other stuff. So it's kind of approaching the metaverse from a pre-hype standpoint, and really thinking about how to do this kind of in a way to evolve like how the internet and Linux and all these other great projects, emerged organically, not from a financial first perspective.
Correct.
But something first from creation. And there's been a lot of, new interest groups ever since Facebook became Meta. And other side was kind of also part of that wave. And I just see a lot of hype and resources going into these huge plays. And in the 2010s, that was Magic Leap as well. They raised $3.6 billion to build a consumer-facing metaverse.
Yeah, that's right.
And they pivoted a few years ago to enterprise because it didn't work out. But it's like a lot of, unfortunate reinvention. And I just wish that, the development process wasn't so siloed. It should be more like how the open source movement fosters free software. And crypto brings in some of the alignment problem-solving tools so that we can fix some of the failure modes of open source development, in terms of funding and incentives for people to work on such.
Yes.
I feel like that's why we're so interested in bitmaps, because that's where all the lessons that we've learned can now be applied to bitmaps, right? There's no single entity that runs bitmap, right? We're all holders, and that's it. There's nothing left.
The only thing we all need to agree on is like that. I guess the Bitcoin blockchain data itself is like it's a good source. Like an underpinning source for all this, and I can't see any other avenue to provide us like a better infrastructure, I guess, or foundation just to get the wheels moving. Right? Now, what those wheels are and what direction we're heading is that's completely in the open, right? And so we have people like Eugen and others who have passionately been developing for many, many, many years who can kind of like contribute to this this direction, right? That's kind of like what the open call is of the movement right now. It's like, who is going to lead this thing?
Yeah.
Right? Because it is open to that. It is a leaderless movement, right? That's Satoshi Nakamoto was the name entity that kind of like brought forth this theory, this idea, right? But the community is what actually made it happen.
Yeah.
Right.
And will make it happen.
Right. Why did it all of a sudden, why in 2 weeks did, 22,000 people claim ownership of these blocks? Like, there's no big company here spending money on this marketing.
Right.
This was as organic as it gets to some sort of like ecosystem in the metaverse, right?
Yeah.
There's no ICO, none of that. Right. So
yeah, this is
basically what do we do with this opportunity is like the real nature of our focus. We talk about this every single day.
Yeah.
And like I said, we already have mScribe in the works.
Yeah.
Which is an inscription platform dedicated to like the Bitmap ecosystem, right? Because we recognize the metaverse is going to have much more like robust, I guess, like in comparison to other NFTs, these aren't like JPEGs that are going to be like the main, I guess, value proposition. The metaverse is much more complex than that.
Yeah.
So we need a platform to support that kind of complexity. So we're working on that. And then of course, MetaZone. How does MetaZone play?
Yeah.
Again, the application layer play into an ecosystem with largely without any technology infrastructure. So like no apps can exist at the moment. So what do we have to do? How do we have to step up here to kind of like underpin that so that we can even exist in the first place, right? So that's our contribution. And go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was going to say on that note, I mean, just kind of reminds me of like the Pocketverse conversation before as well, is that depending on how it's set up, you can kind of enable people to define their own standards, I guess is like a way that I would put it. Like, the Pocketverse could always be like a Decentraland or a Hyperfy instance that's just been transmuxed to be compatible with bitmaps, right?
Correct.
And then, you can have the overworld. Something really cool I saw in like VR chat was like the overworld was this kind of big build. And as you like entered the hallway of a club, it kind of like seamlessly teleported you into the actual like club instance as like a Pocketverse. And I think that kind of like breaking down of like the larger space into the smaller space, and the smaller space is more like self-hosted and self-controlled, or maybe like get Hyperfy to host it, for example. As long as that's like something the user is in control of and they can kind of define themselves, I think that's really powerful. I think when you talk about like metaverse standards, where you might get into trouble is defining a standard that is specifically designed for bitmaps, which makes a lot of sense because you need it to be running on this platform, but kind of in terms of like standards and interoperability, the ones that do really well and get adopted are the ones that are like the most interoperable, and people can kind of just take their stuff and reuse it with that same standard. So maybe it's not a question of which standard does Bitmaps need to define, but maybe more like how does Bitmaps support all these other standards that already exist, and does it have the capability to transmux those into itself? And if it doesn't, is that like a technological failing of the platform that we might be missing? Like smart contracts on chain, like does that need to be a separate layer? And if so, how do we decentralize it? I think you'll kind of quickly get to those questions if you start kind of integrating the already existing formats as opposed to starting ground up.
That's such a good point. And I think you might be right. It's who's going to take the existing technologies and who's going to modify those technologies to make it fit within Bitmap. That way, we're not always starting new every single time.
Yeah.
And so I guess ultimately it's just going to be up to whoever's capable, who's knowledgeable enough to make those modifications to apply to a bitmap and see what works.
Right, and then there's the question of oh, sorry, go ahead.
I considered this when I was first learning about Bitmap. And I immediately raced to Ash and Hyperfy because, again, in my opinion, Hyperfy is just like the most awe-inspiring platform that I've seen yet, other than now recently Upstreet.
Yeah,
Upstreet is phenomenal. But I immediately started DMing Ash. Like, Ash, do you know about Bitmap? Have you heard about Bitmap? Check it out. Pay attention. Like, again, I don't know all the details about cryptocurrency and blockchain that some of the devs know, and he wasn't necessarily optimistic about the fact that it's on Bitcoin. And I don't know what it takes, and I'm not speaking for him. I'm not saying, but like I personally envision like, okay, you created Hyperfy on Ethereum as a bunch of pocket verses that people can buy as an NFT. you could easily replicate that. Or if came the day that Bitcoin for sure took over as a metaverse standard, you are capable of putting Hyperfy on Bitcoin.
Mhm.
So, and I don't know. I guess my point is, like, some devs are not into the idea of Bitcoin.
Hmm.
I think I
There's
understand.
just not much built right now
Yeah.
for supporting such a project. Like, I'm not seeing much in terms of tooling, or seeing it if it's like Ethereum versus Bitcoin. Like, everyone's going to stay on Ethereum because that's where the tooling, that's where the liquidity in terms of people buying and selling and goods, virtual goods on such is. And right now, Bitmap could maybe find its own place being composable with such, but trying to rebuild everything and deploy kind of this parallel, entire stack would make it, PvP, and that just like needs strong incentives to, inspire a dev to like spend their time focusing on such, and it seems right now it's really early days. I don't see much in terms of apps or tooling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's ultimately up to us. Anyone who recognizes the opportunity to build out that tooling, and really it's just incorporating the number of transactions in a given bitmap. I feel like you just need to acknowledge that as part of like the foundation of the technology stack.
Right.
And if you can do that, then then anything's up for game. You have like an open world, or you have Pocketverse or whatever.
Yeah, ultimately, this is a lot. It's going to be very dependent on like not even just bitmaps. This is like ordinals, or just how the whole Bitcoin ecosystem, I guess, matures moving forward, right? Because even that in itself is it's extremely early days, right? There's been previous attempts with like Counterparty and other in the past where people wanted to develop applications on Bitcoin and stuff, and they didn't work out. But this time, this ordinals inception moment since January of this year, literally, it's 8 months old. The idea of building for Bitcoin, building on Bitcoin, right? So that has to mature in a sense. Like right now, it's stuck in the mud in the sense that people have proven you could build fungible units on top of Bitcoin with BRC20s, and they worked. That became $1 billion market on almost overnight.
Yeah.
But it quickly went right back down as quickly as it went up, right? As most new breakthroughs do, until now there's an infrastructure period that follows, right? Like, how are we going to make this even better, right? We can't just flip meme tokens forever because we need functionality.
Yeah,
so,
and we also need to recognize like how much of the metaverse on Bitcoin needs to be on chain, right? Because not everything needs to be on chain. The assets do, right? And maybe the assets don't necessarily need to be on Bitcoin. It could be on a side chain. It could be on Lightning Network,
right?
And it's still, I mean, ultimately, it's built on top of Bitcoin.
Well, my point with bringing up all this other infrastructure beyond Bitmap and just Bitcoin in general is because developers aren't going to see the things that attract developers, right? Like liquidity, things like, is there money to be made here?
Yeah.
If I spend my time and my skill set to develop for this particular ecosystem, where's my ROI?
Yeah, 100%.
Developers need to think like that because they are very highly valuable humans on Earth. So they're not going to just build something if they don't feel almost guaranteed they're going to get something in return, as they should, right? So Bitcoin has a lot to prove in that respect, right? So far, it's very untapped potential, and unlike Ethereum, right? We've already seen multi-billion-dollar ecosystems emerge, hundreds of billions of dollars getting poured into that ecosystem from VCs. Like this is a proven ecosystem, right?
Yeah. So until 8 months ago, Bitcoin was just a buy and hold type of functionality.
So until like again, these devs who are motivated, I guess, or who can maybe like extrapolate, see the opportunity beyond like what exists into today's landscape. Right now, the proof isn't there. Proof of concept hasn't really hit home, and it's not whenever like the broader, I guess, reach to all developers isn't going to happen. Right until then, I understand anybody who's like reluctant to get involved. It makes sense because why would you? It's like, why would you build on Web3 when you could build an app for iOS? You got hundreds of millions of customers potentially.
Yeah,
they're gonna download your app.
Yeah.
Right. That's been the Web3 problem all along.
And that's largely why PFPs took off, because they saw some PFP projects, just a picture project, sell out, and they're like, hey, I can do that.
Correct.
And not until that happens that that has to be the first, group or developers who go in and actually make an attempt.
Agreed.
And once that attempt is successful, all of a sudden you're going to see a flood of devs.
Right. So that is kind of like the space, I guess, that exists at the moment. There is that it's not a guarantee, right? It's not a home run, like guaranteed home run, like building an NFT project in 2021 is, right? So it is more like, do you align with the ethos of what's being built on Bitcoin with ordinals and now bitmaps? And if you do, like, are you willing to dedicate your personal resources to that endeavor or not, right? And some people will, most will not, right? But hopefully the ones that do, they'll lay the foundations to bring in like new value creation that's going to bring in, the liquidity and the user base that's going to attract, a much bigger developer demographic.
So Jin, I guess what I'm picking up from you is like, from your perspective, there's not enough tooling and technology for you to be, like, I guess, all in building on bitmaps. Is that correct?
Y'all were kind of right on the thought with just, I think, public goods funding ecosystems. Like NFTs could go towards that, where a project selling out could then fund open source software, for example, that develops out the ecosystem, the tooling that's required, gets some money in the devs' hands that aligns them towards that mission.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of like public goods funding, that's kind of like seems like a prerequisite to filling out that kind of space.
Morph, what is it going to take for you? What sort of development in the, I guess, Bitmap ecosystem needs to happen for you to go all in and build on top of Bitmap?
I need to see some bigger like foundational stuff. Like you guys talk about the districts. I figure whatever district you're in will have a huge effect on your technology stack, right? Like what your district kind of uses as the technology stack, you'll need to be at least like interoperable with. And so because I haven't yet like seen an example of that end to end, I'm really struggling to see like how I could fit in there, right? I like the idea that's on Bitcoin. I like that Bitcoin has like valuable block space, and I like that it's like constrained by proof of work, because it kind of gives like a real tangibility to your plot being, like in both time and space. It's kind of like solidified, right? But for now, I mean, that's all it is to me, really, is like an ENS system. And I think that's really cool. I think it's like super dope that you could point your block somewhere and say like, oh, this block points to like even my website. I think that's like a really awesome innovation. It's so cool to see on Bitcoin, but I'm not seeing a full ecosystem where I could actually jump in.
Yeah.
And again, like I'm not a foundational developer, right? Like I can totally come in and use the SDKs and build on top of the SDKs and maybe have some cool projects there. But until those SDKs exist, it's really just me looking at a kind of a blank open slate. And it would just require too much work for me to jump in
100%.
right now. So once I see people building that, then I can get excited and maybe even like help build out those foundational things. But until some group takes the charge there and there's like end-to-end proof of concept MVP, I think it's still theory, right? And it's cool theory, but I just need to see a little more before I can like devote time to it and energy.
Yeah, I definitely agree 100% with what you're saying, Morph, because I mean, I guess we can talk about what we're working on, and to a certain extent, it's exactly what we've been talking about. It's selecting a stack and then building an SDK on top of that stack so that developers can come in and build on top of that stack. Now, it doesn't mean that it's going to be the right stack, right? It doesn't mean that, and we have to make decisions. Like, is it going to be an open world? Is it going to be a client application? Or is it going to be run on just a browser? Like, these are the sort of decisions that the foundational part of like the decision making needs to happen in order to get developers like Morph and Jin on board. And it's like, okay, I'll leverage this SDK and I'll build out what I'm thinking is going to work, right? And so selecting the operating system, SDK, and then the SDK will enable sort of like the app layer, right? Because the app layer is where like if you look at what happened with the internet, the people who decided the internet standards, they didn't become billionaires, right? It was the application layer, right? Apple, Microsoft, those types of organizations. They're the ones who built, billion-dollar projects on top of the standards.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the app layer that's going to matter, not so much like the foundational stuff. But foundational stuff has to be right first in order to enable that app layer. And so that's, and that's why I was like really interested in talking to you guys, because I wanted to confirm what I thought was needed to be built, and it is that operating system which gives us the SDK, which allows developers to come in and actually do stuff, because not all developers are like foundational stuff, like Morph was saying.
Yeah, because it's really hard to build that stuff.
Yeah,
it takes a lot of commitment and resources and time that you could be building something else,
right?
That can give you an ROI, like I said. So it makes sense. This is why these infrastructure periods tend to last so long, because it's tough to figure who is gonna be that this indie team or organization, whatever, that kind of wants to contribute to that level, like being part of like history in a sense, right?
Yeah.
There is like a Hall of Fame of the internet. Apparently, I just learned this recently, and most of those inductees are the people who built these infrastructure components.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, they're not billionaires, like you said.
Correct.
They're the researchers and scientists. Most of them, theorists, and obviously they're very highly technical. But
and they're respected. But
but they're not Bill Gates. They're not household names like
right.
like you're saying. The people who followed them, and leverage their offerings, right? So. Yeah, I think that's where we are in the metaverse, like timeline of history. We're like, who's going to be those 30, 40-year Hall of Fame inductees of the metaverse, right? Who's going to build the infrastructure that eventually, the next billionaires of the world will build, the apps of the metaverse.
Yeah.
That's how we see it. And
yeah. So this,
and you don't
go ahead.
You don't have to necessarily get that right. You don't have to like foresee like what is all the standards of the open metaverse and like how do we make sure that we get it right the first time. It's not always like necessary, because I think Decentraland, something they did that was really cool with this whole avatar system is that VRM like blew up after DCL, right? Like VRM was not like super huge, and DCL kind of was ahead of them in the avatar kind of format. And then once VRM got adopted, and if anyone doesn't know, VRM is just like the format that we have for our avatars right here. It just enables us to do things like the mouth movement and the eye movement and have like a interoperable GLB model. So DCL didn't really know about any of that before it happened. They had to take what they had and kind of like transmux it into VRM after the fact. But because they had made like the right decisions early of just like keeping their standards relatively standardized to what was already popular, like GLB, and also using like Unity skeletons and like Unity engine kind of theory, they were able to take that and like really easily put it in this completely different format that is now interoperable and is kind of becoming the metaverse standard. So you don't always necessarily have to get it right, but you do need to have like a certain amount of leeway and have it be open enough that you can kind of come in and like convert it into like other formats and variants, right?
Yeah, and this is definitely a tall task, because you have to, like Morph was saying, you have to incorporate a lot of these, all this experience that we've come up with and throughout the years, and not make the same mistakes again. Otherwise, we're just spinning our wheels and just wasting time. And like you're saying again, Decentraland did a lot of things right. They did an SDK. It allowed developers to come in and start making content. But we also have to take, those lessons learned, as well as like what did work about Decentraland and what didn't, and figure out like what, how would you do it better, right? If you had 800,000 chances, how would you change what Decentraland did so that, it has an improved outcome, right?
Yeah.
Which is not easy. So yeah, I think let's call it here, guys. We've been here for about hour 20 or so. I really appreciate you guys for joining. This is going to be one of those conversations that is ongoing. I want to have another one of these once we, I don't know, breach the next step in the Bitmap ecosystem, or maybe if there's like another roadblock in the way to us actually getting there.
I think this could serve just like for all of us, since we're all passionate in building towards the same goals, right? Like it
Yeah.
almost is like a group therapy session through like times of like, everybody's spinning up these videos of like why we're all crazy or stupid, I guess, on YouTube. They're getting tens of millions of views.
Yeah.
Right? What was the one that was released like a week ago? It was like, I spent a week in the metaverse or something.
Yeah.
And then there's another guy, he did a whole hour-long hit piece on Decentraland. It's like, damn, dude, at certain moments, like we all need to kind of like bound together and be like, man, it's like we're not crazy, right?
Yeah.
Like a little therapy session like this would be helpful for all of us, I feel like, because it does feel like, you know, the world is against what it is we're trying to do for whatever reason. But I always take that as a positive sign, usually.
Yeah. You want to be one of the crazy ones because that's where the action is. That's where the opportunities are. And I mean, that's why we're all sitting here in the virtual space, you know, trying to figure it out.
Yeah. So in other words, next time you guys do this, definitely send us an invite so we could jump in anytime.
Well, can I leave everyone with a thought?
Sure.
Something that I've noticed in my Web3 experience. Like we all jumped in excited about Web3, and those of us who jumped in, like we're a small percentage of the world population. I always like to say that like we're the sperm that made it, you know. And
nice.
But at some point, like people, you get complacent and you stop exploring. Like we were crazy enough to dive into Web3, and then a lot of people got complacent and stopped exploring. They stopped at PFP NFTs, or you know, and they still do Twitter Spaces, or they still even do what was that, Clubhouse? Clubhouse is the one before Twitter Space. Like they still do that, you know. It's like, and there's like now people like us, the actual metaverse explorers, we're a small percentage of the Web3 population.
True.
That's true.
You know, and so it's very important, I think. Keep exploring. Don't get complacent. Keep looking. Don't get caught up on one platform and think that's the way. Because I think we all know that perhaps the ultimate metaverse may not even exist yet. You know.
100%.
Yeah. And the first attempt is not necessarily going to be the one that wins out, right? So this is one of those things where we gotta think about the MVPs, build out those MVPs, test our assumptions. And if it doesn't work, we test other assumptions until it does.
Right. Yeah. I'll definitely, I don't know. I like to say all contributions are welcome. That's like my new motto.
Yeah.
You know, so anybody who has any idea or any way to contribute, like never doubt yourself. Like, nah, this isn't, I don't know. Nobody's going to appreciate this because you never know.
Yeah.
You never know. just throw it out there, you know?
All right, guys. Shout out to Pepe God. He came in here a little late. We're recording a podcast.
Pepe's here.
Our Lord Pepe.
Pepe God, one of the best parkour builders in Decentraland history, I think.
Yeah, dude.
Oh, really? So I was here for the last or about 20 minutes. Yeah. No, that's cool, man.
Glad you can make it, dude. Yeah.
Jin, I really appreciate your experience here, and Morph as well.
Yeah, dude.
We got to do this again. We got to go deeper into like the technicals and try to figure out like what are the next steps, you know, besides identifying the operating system, and what exactly have we learned from this experience building in the metaverse for the last, you know, collectively, you know, 30 years that we've been here. You know, what have we learned? What mistakes shouldn't be made again, right, when selecting this operating system stack? And then, you know, how do we get developers involved in building, you know, content so that people, when they come here, they stick around, right? Correct. So these are all like the tough things. But I really appreciate you guys for joining us on this podcast, man.
Yeah, thanks for having us. It's been a good convo.
Yeah, man.
And yeah, I think more devs cross-platform should gather, and that's the kind of events that we tend to foster, just bringing together builders and makers from across the metaverse.
Agreed. Any last thoughts, Morph?
No, I'm just excited to see where this space goes. Like I said, I love Bitcoin and I love the metaverse. Yeah, it's cool to see these spaces coming together.
Excellent. All right, guys. That's it for us. I really appreciate you for watching and joining us here in this conversation. If you have any thoughts, definitely let us know in the comment section below. And then all the links for everybody are going to be in the description below. Just make sure you guys help me out with, you know, your Twitter accounts, anything that you want to for the audience to kind of like click through and kind of learn, just put it in our Discord chat that we have, and that's it. Make sure I guess you follow us on our Twitter accounts as well, and that's it for us.
Never leave the metaverse, dude. Shout out Neb.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.